just registering so that we can find again. We'll ask you if we put it on some platform, but I don't think so. As you know, at the moment, we have the COP30 being happening in Brazil under the presidency of Lula. It's 10 years after the Paris Agreement, which indeed opened a global path to limit and adapt to climate change. And indeed, the year 2024 has been confirmed as the warmest year that was never registered, and which is already above the 1.5 degree from the pre-industrial period that was gone of no limit agreed on the Paris Agreement 10 years ago. This COP also takes place in a moment where climate action to mitigate climate change are being put aside in many countries and continents. Maybe we're gonna speak about that, but we had the Omnibus Directive, which was voted last week in the European Parliament, which epitomizes this difficulties to tackle climate change. And of course, we have the elephant in the room, which is not in Belém, which are the United States, which is governed by climatosceptic, which maybe is kind of the same values behind, which go against the scientific consensus. Still, China sticks to its plan, but is not going into a leadership on climate change mitigation at the world stage. And it questions the role the EU want to take in the upcoming years. Lula speaks and opens the COP30 about Moritão. I'm very sorry for my Brazilian. Maybe Adrien will help with that. Say that again?
Multirão.
Thank you. Which is the idea of shared effort to tackle climate change. He also spoke about shared responsibility, but not equal responsibility, which is also something very important in the negotiation around COP30. We have tonight two speakers. Thank you very much to you two for being here. We have Chloé Nicolas-Jacques, who is an activist on social justice and environmental justice. She works in Brussels. She's working a lot with MEPs in the European Parliament. She's been following a lot those last years the Green Deal and all what's related to that. And I remember that I've seen a video from her so clear and so clear-cut on the stakes and what goes on, which also brings how we can communicate and make EU made simple, as in the Federalist we try to say it. And Adrien Fabre, you're a researcher in the French CNRS, which is a research institute, and you wrote a book on a global plan against extreme poverty and climate change. Yeah, it's on the table over there. Thank you. Which is also on those topics. So maybe to start with, I don't know who want to start. What are the main stakes to you of this COP?
I can
you go
start.
first.
Okay. So in general, I don't expect much of COPs because they require the unanimity rule to get an agreement. So it's always the least common denominator agreement. But this COP, I think the thing that the Brazilian presidency is trying to push, and where there is some hope, is the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, which is a kind of weird initiative, but the goal is to finance the protection, I mean, the conservation of tropical forests. I can explain more the mechanisms if you want. Yeah, I think this is the main issue on which there is uncertainty on the outcome.
Yep, happy to follow up on that. The other things that are on the table are there's currently, let's say, a coalition of the willing that's sort of forming to phase out fossil fuels, even though it's rhetoric and words. And then what happens at home, we realize that we're actually nowhere near phasing out fossil fuels anywhere. And then I think the other big thing that raises a lot of expectations and is likely to underdeliver, like Adrien said, is generally the state of play at COPs is on financing. So there was a pledge that was made at the last COP for wealthier countries to support less wealthy countries. But sadly, the political context being what it is, well, actually, it's not just a political context, because for the past few years already, countries were very reluctant into putting the money that they were supposed to put to support countries in the global south. But what we're seeing right now is that it's becoming increasingly difficult for wealthier countries to justify giving climate support to their population, especially when at home they are working on austerity policies and they are struggling with budgets. I'm talking mainly about the EU. It's becoming increasingly difficult, and they're using this as an excuse to fail on their commitments on climate finance.
All right. Thank you very much. This was an introduction. Thank you very much for those who are joining. We'll discuss in two parts. First, the international decision, and then second, the question of environmental and social justice. But because we're in the Federalist, we're also always very keen on speaking about participating in environmental debate for a long time, since the Earth Summit in Rio, already in Brazil, in 1992, where Federalists were already there and already starting working with civil society. And the World Federalist Movement, who had its Congress 2 weeks ago, restated several decisions on the need to establish a supranational democratic climate decision-making system, and the need for an international court for the environment, especially to have justice decision on ecocides and have ecocide working, legally working at a global level. You said it, Adrien, there are always still unanimity in COP, so you don't wait too much for that. That's something we hear too much within the Federalists, the question of unanimity at all levels. And also the thing that those decisions are non-binding at the moment. How do you perceive this intergovernmental and non-binding decision-making process? To you, what shall be done to change that, and what could be done as well in this reality? Maybe we can take a bit more time on that.
Yes, thanks. So maybe this is the occasion to talk about the proposal I put forward in my book, which is kind of the benchmark proposal from economists, which is to put a price on greenhouse gas emission. So the way we work is that you cap greenhouse gas emission at the global level, with a cap that decreases over time in line with the Paris Agreement targets. down to zero in like 2060, 2070, or before, depending on the level of ambition. And the emission permits would be auctioned every year to polluting firms at the source of emissions. And the revenue from the carbon price would be returned on an equal per capita basis, ideally, which corresponds to an equal right to emit for every human, and which would involve transfers from people with a carbon footprint larger than the world average to people with a carbon footprint lower than the world average. So from the global north to the global south. This would collect about 1% of the world GDP in carbon pricing revenue, and finance basic cash transfer, basic income of about $30 per month in purchasing parity power, so enough to eradicate extreme poverty. And that's the ideal scenario. Of course, we don't expect countries like the US, Russia, or Saudi Arabia to join such a proposal, but this can be launched by a coalition of the willing countries. And even then, it's a long shot to have the rest of the world join such an ambitious proposal. So perhaps something that would get us almost there, but that stays closer to the current framework of negotiations is a coalition of the willing agreeing on rules on how to define their nationally determined contributions. So right now, the way the Paris Agreement works is that each country determines their level of ambition, and the so-called nationally determined contributions don't add up in the sense that they are consistent with the warming of 2.6 degrees in 2100, and not 2 degrees or 1.5, as the treaty requires it. And a coalition of the willing could agree that jointly they define their NDC in a way that is consistent with the Paris Agreement targets, and that they can only trade mitigation outcomes. So this becomes a bit technical, but basically the Paris Agreement, Article 6.2, allows countries to exchange carbon credits. So a country that emits less than its nationally determined contribution is allowed to sell carbon credits to countries that emits more and fails its target. And nothing regulates these transfers of mitigation outcomes at the moment, which means that you can have countries that jointly do not meet the Paris Agreement target in their own targets, and trade. So you have a country that instead, like the EU, for example, instead of reducing their emissions domestically, they will, that has been agreed a few weeks ago, they will allow themselves to buy a certain amount of carbon credits from abroad. They say that this is only 5% of their emission that they will allow to buy from abroad, but it's actually 5% of the 1990 emissions. So in a target of minus 90% emission in 2040, this would be equivalent to half of EU emission that can be emitted on top of its targets through the purchase of emission reductions abroad. And as I explained earlier, the thing is that these emission reduction abroad are not, I mean, nothing guarantees that they are sufficiently additional in the sense that maybe the EU will pay this emissions reduction at too low a price from countries that are not ambitious, and that collectively with the EU, these sellers and buyers will not respect the Paris Agreement targets. Yeah, that's the proposal.
We'll have a moment at the end to discuss all that as well.
Yeah, or if someone needs a clarification question, feel free to ask, I guess.
Yeah, big question. I was thinking actually that maybe I could share my experience participating in the plastics treaty negotiation last year, because I think that's a good example of these types of processes and the limitations and exactly what we're witnessing at COP as well. So I, for work, attended the negotiations in South Korea last December, on trying to get a plastics treaty through the finish line. Spoiler alert, we still don't have a plastics treaty, so clearly negotiations have failed. But basically, unlike the COP, it was a very rushed process. So from between the moment that countries decided that they wanted to have a plastics treaty and what was supposed to be the final negotiations last year, they were about 2 years. So they met really regularly. And for me, I think what was the most obvious, and not just for me, for every journalist, every NGO, I think every delegate that wanted to get something out of the finish line, what was the most obvious pain point is, as Adrien mentioned, the issue of consensus. And the UN set out this rule when they were, there were no bad faith, let's put it that way, from players, right? So everyone wanted to participate. They weren't necessarily on the same page, but there was a willingness to engage in a joint process and to get something out of it. We are in a very different situation. We're in a situation where groups of countries are actively blocking conversation and negotiation. And I was able to see it very much with my own eyes. And it's not even complicated blocking, it's not even super elaborate stuff. To give you a very concrete example of what blocking from these countries, petrostates, of course, so like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, looked like, it's as simple as saying, constantly coming back to the rules of procedure. That's the first thing. So constantly saying, this is not in the rules of procedure. We cannot discuss this. This word is not in the rules of procedure. Therefore, it shouldn't happen. It's as simple as saying, I don't agree. There should be a comma there. I think it's irrelevant. Or to the point of when everybody's in plenary and countries are expected to make statements. It's countries that basically use their time saying stuff such as, Mr. Chairman, I don't agree. We have the mandate to be here, blah, 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 every single time in plenary. So some people may fantasize like crazy complicated technical stuff, but this is what blockage looks like. And they're not at all interested in negotiating. So many countries have made concessions, have tried to talk to them, and they talk between themselves, and there really clearly is a strategy to block anything that comes out of it. And there was a really interesting article, I think it was in the New York Times last year, that basically highlighted how Saudi Arabia is sabotaging international negotiations, all of them, right? Everything that relates to the environment. So the COP, the Plastics Treaty, the Biodiversity COP, every single UN negotiation is currently being sabotaged. There's no other words for it. So who was it who kept saying, you would really be a fool to constantly play by the same rules and expect a different result? Can't remember who said that. Wasn't it Einstein?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is literally what we're being faced with, is we are constantly repeating the same format using the same rules, but we're expecting a different results. There's no way we're going to get a different results when we have parties that are actively against the process and against getting anything. And it's getting painfully obvious. So there were some people that were trying to think of what could happen. And I think, Adrien, you mentioned the coalition of the willing. So there were several things on the table specifically for the plastics treaty, which I think could apply also to climate COP. On plastics treaty, there was the suggestion to move to a vote. right? So to have a two-third majority, and consider that if we had a two-third majority, then a treaty would be adopted. Problem is, there was no agreement on the rules of procedure to begin with. So when you don't have an agreement on the rules of procedure, it's even hard to like even propose a vote, and everybody was terrified of it. And the other thing clearly is to get a coalition of willing and perhaps even get out of the UN context. And it has been done before. There are international environmental treaties or human rights treaties, actually, for a matter of fact, a bunch of treaties, not just environmental and human rights, that were agreed outside of the UN framework. And it's fine. I don't know why we're so scared of exiting the UN framework. It's like it's this big unchangeable thing that we shouldn't touch. But when you look at some pretty successful convention, whether it's the Geneva Convention or the Basel Convention on hazardous products, they were agreed to outside of the UN framework. And I think when you have players that clearly don't want to play the game, it's time to start thinking about changing the rules. And that is definitely an option. Getting a coalition of the willing, perhaps even exiting the UN framework, because otherwise we're just going to stay stuck and we're just going to repeat the same thing over and over again.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure there are already many thoughtful thoughts on what you just said. You wanted to give an input as well on the decision of the International Court of Justice on the question of responsibility, this decision of July, I think it was this summer. I think you wanted to add a bit on that in terms of international justice and the tool we have.
Who, Chloe or I?
Go for it.
Okay. Yes, the ICG gave an advisory, so non-binding opinion that's very strong, unprecedented, and unexpected. This case has been brought by a group of 20 students from small Pacific islands, and they obtained very strong words from the ICG stating that states, even those who are not parties to international treaties, have an obligation to fight climate change. That the appropriate target is 1.5 degree, it's not 2 degree. If a state is found to do some harm to the environment, the climate, it has to stop doing it. For example, if it licensed a new oil field, this license should be removed. It has to stop repeating the harm. If it's like a subsidy for fossil fuels, for example, it has to stop giving it, and it has to compensate. So now it gives the ground for other courts to be much more firm and apply international law, and consider international law as binding. And it also gives the possibility to anyone to sue governments for their climate inaction. The court also ruled that the distinction of developed versus developing countries that hasn't been revised since 1990 in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is obsolete and has to be updated. So basically, the ICG gives all the tools for climate activists to condemn states and even firms for their lack of climate action.
Yeah, no, I think there's not much to add to what has just been said. I would just say that from my perspective in the movement, this was really an earthquake, a really positive one, I would say. And because more and more people are really turning to litigation as a mean of action, right? Because when you've got when you've got governments that are backtracking, when you've got corporations that are basically maintaining business as usual, litigation really is the only thing you have left. On top of course, civil disobedience and a bunch of other tactics, but litigation is really taking up, and more people are looking at litigation, especially when they're supported by pro bono lawyers or organizations such as Climate Earth or others. So really positively welcomed, because as was mentioned, it will have concrete impact on the decisions that judges will take at the national level. And so, yeah, many people are looking at this with a lot of hope. So let's see how it's used in the next few years, concretely in courts and cases. But really positive development.
And maybe, Chloe, if you want to go a bit further on this proposal for an international court of the environment and having the crime of ecocide legally working in the international, how would organizations see that? Is there already an agreement among them?
That is a question to which I don't have the answer. But there was a crime of ecocides last time I checked, because this was a few years ago. There was an initiative to bring that. There was a proposal at the European level, which, if I'm not mistaken, was adopted on ecocides. The problem is always and I'm going to divert on this, but the problem is the difference between what's politically said and then the implementation, right? So, and then the knowledge and the access to justice. So actually, there's a lot to unpack there. But the knowledge for groups that are affected or people that might use these roles to sue is not necessarily good or important. Then there's the problem of access to justice. So in Europe, we have the Aarhus Convention, but it's not, unless you have the support of a pro bono lawyer or a group of lawyers. I mean, you as an individual, I don't know who's on the call, but it's unlikely that you're going to have the knowledge, the legal knowledge to use these regulations to have access to justice. So I think that's also a problem. And then it's just more broadly, I think the differentiation between what we see as presented as willingness and even possibly sometimes adopted at the European level, for instance, and then the implementation. And just we're talking about ecocides, and ecocide has a very precise definition. So not everything can be identified as ecocide. But basically, what we're seeing now in the context of the deregulation wave that we're seeing at the European level, so what was presented as simplification, which happened to be deregulation, von der Leyen said it herself. We're seeing a wave of omnibuses. How familiar are people with omnibus? Maybe no? Okay.
You can make a small recap, I think.
So basically, okay, let's look at what happened last year, right? So when von der Leyen 2 came into power, and the majority is now basically a conservative far-right majority in the European Parliament, the priority is no longer the Green Deal, no longer climate, none of that. It's Europe's competitiveness, right? No matter what that means, but we need to lift up Europe's competitiveness. Draghi said so. If Draghi said it, must be the Bible. And so what happens is that to achieve Europe's competitiveness, the Commission has engaged in what it calls omnibuses. And an omnibus is basically a process, legal process, whereby you can reopen a bunch of previously adopted texts, right? Initially, it's to make slight technical changes to your text. So you group a bunch of them and you say, these are the technical requirements, or implementation date has changed, etc. What the Commission is now doing is basically using the omnibus procedure to group some text together and then reopen them. Reopen them, not to make them more ambitious, of course, but to actually weaken them. And so the first omnibus that was presented earlier this year was on 2 key regulations, actually 3, but the third one is not as affected as the others. One is the due diligence directive, that is supposed to make, and I'm saying supposed because it's so empty right now that it's not going to do anything, supposed to make corporations accountable for the human rights and environmental abuses in the supply chain. So think textile companies and factories collapsing in Bangladesh. These companies would have been accountable for that, held accountable. Think Total Energy and the oil spill, Shell, sorry, and the oil spill in Nigeria. That would have helped this law. All of these things that are happening across the world, corporations would have been held accountable for this. Shein, great example. Shein, sorry for my language, but all the crap that we're receiving on European soil, Shein would have fallen under the due diligence directive. The other law that was reopened is complicated but very important one, which is called the CSRD. It's obligation of sustainable reporting for companies. So obligations for a company to say, this is my impact, this is how I measure it, etc. These two laws are crucial for many, many things. They're crucial for human rights, but they're also crucial for climate, because one of the key elements of the due diligence directive was what we call climate transition plans. So if this regulation had actually stayed the way it was, corporations in the scope, which was, mind you, not a majority of European companies, would have had to basically present and adopt and sort of implement climate transition plans that would have made them compatible with the Paris Agreement. That was the ambition. Huge leverage to make companies accountable, right? And to make them transition and basically reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Sadly, these rules were bundled together in an omnibus. And because of the political context being what it is, I'll spare you the details. Last week, there was a vote and the Conservatives allied with the far right to basically kill the due diligence directive. So there's still a law, but it's completely empty. No civil liability. We were talking about access to justice. So that means that basically people don't really have access to justice anymore. Climate transition plans, deleted. It's an empty shell. This is the first omnibus. On the desk of the Commission, there are currently 9 omnibuses on a wide range of topics, including chemical, digital, but also one omnibus, which is called environment. And environment is actually very wide. It touches upon a lot of different things, but things such as pesticides, biodiversity, etc. So just to say that also because of this new majority and this new alliance that was formalized last week, it's very concerning what we're seeing for Europe. And actually, Europe keeps saying that it's on track when it comes to climate commitments, etc. Actually, if you look a little bit deeper at the numbers, we're not on track. We are not. Let's just be very clear. And it's very worrying because under this guise, and I'll stop talking, I promise, but under this guise of a race to the bottom with China and the US, which we cannot win, we will never be able to pour the amount of subsidies that China is pouring in its industry to decarbonize, for instance. We will never attain the level of deregulation that the US have. But under a disguise of a race to the bottom with these two nations to hopefully boost our competitiveness, which is not the way to achieve competitiveness, by the way, but we are deregulating every role that made Europe a global power, basically, because we have a market of 450 million consumers. This is our biggest strength, right? And we're not using it. We are basically deregulating all the rules so that international companies are going to be able to continue selling us terrible things. Human rights, environmental abuses are going to be able to continue. And we are hoping that this will basically boost the European economy. Once again, this is not how you boost an economy. And I will stop there. And I don't even know if I answered your question, to be honest, because it started with ecocide, but it's just a lot of links to be made there.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that and for this recap as well of what happened last week, which was a bit maybe not that well explained to all of European citizens. Maybe we move to the second part of our discussion on environmental and social justice, where we can also dig a bit into Adrien's proposal as well. We have in the COP30 put at the forefront the recognition of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, based on the fact that rich countries have been most from the carbon-based economy, which is currently denied from, for instance, the French Minister from Environment. There are already several tools that have been sought to mobilize finance. Adrien, you exposed a new one with this group of coalition of the willing. This is a 2025 words, a coalition of the willing. Maybe Chloe, we start with you. To you, what would be the main argument for environmental justice, which could be used nowadays towards European leaders in the political context you just described? What are, maybe it's not a magic stick that you have, but maybe some thoughts you can share with us.
Okay, this is going to be very depressing, but all things climate don't cut it anymore for European leaders. If you use climate alone, you're not going to cut through, nobody's going to listen to you. So, sadly, if you want anyone to listen to you, you have to link climate and the economy, climate and competitiveness, or the impacts that climate will have on GDP or on European companies or on European infrastructure. One thing that worked quite well is I helped disseminating a report that came out in September about the economic impacts of the heat wave and other extreme weather events that happen over the summer. So researchers made calculations on how it would impact, notably at the regional level. And this is one of the things that worked really well with decision makers, because putting the numbers of how much it's going to cost them, how much it's going to cost regional authority or insurances, etc. This is what is currently cutting through to European leaders. Climate for the sake of climate, not anymore. Climate as a moral imperative, not anymore. Climate as, yeah, basically just climate. So you really have to link it to competitiveness or the economy, which is extremely debatable if you ask me, but we're in the context that we're in, so we have to adapt as well. But yeah, and the problem is that it really also depends on the decision makers. So this is working with, let's say, liberals, but conservatives, at least at the European level, we're at a stage where it's not even about facts and arguments anymore. It's complete ideology. They understand that there are votes to gain by bashing the Green Deal, by bashing anything that relates to climate, because they see that it's working with the far right, and the far right is gaining ground everywhere. So they're really making this narrative their own. And why am I saying that it's not about facts for the conservatives anymore? Happy to have a conversation about this, but it's because the EPP are not even taking the arguments from companies. They are taking arguments from a small minority of companies that matches their narrative. Because actually, when you look at how many companies are calling for dismantling of the Green Deal, environmental backlash, etc., it's actually a minority of companies, but that are the most vocal. The majority of European companies want simplification, yes, but don't want deregulation and want to continue having clarity and visibility around what it means to decarbonize in the future. The problem is there is a tiny minority of companies led by fossil fuel industry and led by other very polluting industries that are calling for big deregulation, big backlash on anything climate and environmental policies. And conservatives right now, very worryingly so, are listening to these voices. I am hearing from a group of ambitious, committed companies that they're not even cutting through. They are really finding it difficult to have meetings with conservative MEPs to present their arguments. And you'd think conservatives would talk to companies. So yeah, I think it's a very difficult time. We need to reinvent the argument. We need to reinvest the power play. But basically, I would say right now, and at least for a few more years, I would say everything has to be a link between climate and economic impacts.
Okay. Thank you very much for those thoughts that links as well to many other thoughts I think we have within the Federalist. Adrien, you worked on this proposal for global justice based on climate with this capping of emission and transfer from those who emit too much to those who emit too less, with basic income to everyone and support project. But you're also working to push forward this proposal, and you've been moving around the world as well to discuss that. What is your main line of argument? What kind of argument you feel are working, are the most efficient on this proposal on social and environmental justice?
Yeah, I think so to bridge with what Chloe just said, people's priority are their purchasing power. It doesn't mean that they don't care about the climate or about poverty. Most people around the world are very concerned about climate change and want strong action. Actually, I think it's not rewarding for political parties to let go. I mean, to stop fighting climate change. I think it's a misinterpretation from them of what people want. Or maybe it's defending special interests, because yes, people want more purchasing power, but you can have both if the bulk of the burden of the transition is put to the richest people. And this is a winning package. So increased taxes on the wealthiest, bundled with north to south transfers and climate action, and more public services. So basically, when you propose a left-wing program, people like it. One reason why we don't hear global justice proposals in the public debate is that it requires international coordination. Otherwise, a politician would not be credible if they propose an international policy just in their country. So I think what is missing to fight nationalists around the world is an international movement in favor of sustainable development with common proposals. And I think here it's a very European or maybe even beyond Europe, I don't know, public. And this is great that there is this kind of intellectual convergence at the continental level. It would be even better to enlarge this at the international level. And to answer your question, Chloe, what works best, and actually the reason why I started doing advocacy, is the result that there is strong majority support for global justice, global climate justice proposals. When we survey people around the world, we see that they would accept very stringent climate and redistribution policies. It's much harder to make them agree on that if it's only their own country that does it, and their neighbor can continue polluting, and so we end up in this race to the bottom because of a lack of international coordination. And I think this starts with grassroots movements that should internationalize.
All right. Thank you very much. Very enlightening as well, I think, for us. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on how we can mobilize European leaders on social justice, or do you think you say already quite a lot on that? Social justice and environmental justice. Did you say enough of that? Or I see that there are already people who want to go to the third part of the discussion, which is.
I can add briefly. I think there are certain framings that work, right? And we're seeing them work. I think the example that I gave around the impacts of extreme weather events, the argument around Europe's energy sovereignty and security, to phase out fossil fuels, that's an argument that resonates with, let's say, a less traditional progressive audience, right? Because yes, we're phasing out of Russian gas, of Russian fossil fuels, basically, but we are currently tying ourselves to different autocrats, the US, and then some countries that are not really known to be our best friends, right? So this argument around phasing out fossil fuels is good for Europe's sovereignty and Europe's security. That's the kind of things that also cut through. Then I think when it comes to social justice, the argument of social justice, I think what we need is basically just a rebalance of power as well, right? Because right now, let me tell you, for being in Brussels, the corporate lobbies are just so happy with the current context. They are really, really pushing for the deregulation wave, and nobody's really countering the arguments. They are spending more than ever before. Like 1.3 billion euros was spent in lobbying in Brussels in 2023, more than ever before. That's a sharp increase from 10 years ago. And on the other side, what we're seeing is basically attacks, massive attacks on NGOs and civil society. Less funding, attacks on credibility, attacks on the agenda, etc. So the imbalance of power is huge. And so until there's no big enough, let's put it that way, social mobilization, the sense of impunity from certain decision makers, at least at European level, alongside some corporations and some private interest, will sadly continue. So we really need to think about how to make new alliances, how to basically have a narrative that actually speaks to people, and how do we make them engage in those policies and basically just get a sense of agency. Because I think that's also one of the things that explains why we're in the situation that we're in. People have lost that sense of agency. They do believe that what they're going to do themselves is not going to matter anymore. And that's historically for many reasons, because we lost the places where we would organize together, whether that was unions, that was churches, those places, which traditionally this is where we organized as people. And because we've sort of lost these places, and because of the rise of individuality in the capitalistic society that we live in, people really struggle to feel like they have a sense of agency. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to remobilize people in order to recreate that power balance that is currently very much lost, at least speaking for my level, which is the EU level. Decision makers don't feel watched. They feel like they can pretty much do anything. So for me, if you ask me one of the things that would work the most, I would say, and it's a long run and it's going to take time, but it's essential if we want to prevent what we're currently faced with.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to open up a time of question and answer. Even if we started late, we'll end on time because it's already super late for our colleague who ate very early. I just would like to share a quick thought, which is as well that what we have to do as federalists is also very close to what you say, Chloe, on what NGOs on climate and social justice have to do as well in terms of how we liaise, do collaborate with other NGOs, how we change our mean of action because the context dramatically changed as well. I think all those thoughts you shared with us is also food for thoughts for us, not only with regard to environmental issues, but as well more globally in terms of federalist issues, which is a tool somehow to deal with policies. We'll try to have a discussion which is balanced, generally speaking. So we'll start with Catherine. Maybe you can just introduce yourself at the beginning so that they know where you come from. And then one man, and then another woman, and then another man, and then another woman, and then another man. so that we have a balanced discussion. Catherine, I let you start.
Thanks, Chloe. Okay, I'm Catherine Viedan, Secretary General of UF Group Europe. We are based in Brussels, and we work on European policies, of course. We are a section of UF, of course. And I think probably Chloe mentioned it, but I would like to double check on that. This idea or this observation that decarbonization is actually a way for Europe to be more competitive, and dismantling, I mean, this is being mentioned by a number of observers. So I don't think there is a necessary contradiction between competitiveness and climate change and the fight against climate change. To the contrary, dismantling the Green Pact is actually going to increase our use of fossil fuels and increase our dependency on imports of energy, in particular rare earths and what have you. This is, and I would like also to mention, to quote Mr. Séjourné, who said decarbonation is an economic strategy. Meaning, you know, it's not just a moral crusade that we're conducting. There's a thinking beyond that. And the thinking is good for our economy and it's good for our competitiveness. So could you please confirm that I got you right, or maybe you didn't have time to develop on that issue, which I think is key because it's fighting a certain doxa which is being imposed recently. But maybe Adrien has a comment as well. That was my question.
Yeah, so no, absolutely, you got it right. I mean, it's a good idea for several reasons. The first one, very simply, basic mathematics, is that cost of inaction is way higher than cost of action. So if you just start from this perspective, you realize that there's really no other route. And it makes sense at every level. You know, it makes sense from an energy perspective. So the cost of imported fossil fuels is gigantic. The cost of subsidies that we give to fossil fuels every year is gigantic. There are going to be costs to the transition that shouldn't be like lowered. So for instance, the investment in grids. If we actually want to electrify Europe, we're going to have to invest massively in grids. So that might be a challenge. Let's see how Europe pulls it off. There will be a proposal on grids coming out on the 10th of December, if I'm right. The main problem that I see is that the political discourse around the need to decarbonize for Europe is there. Even von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech 2 months ago repeated it. You know, the future of Europe is electric. This is the big Europe sovereign moment, etc., etc. The problem is we're saying all the right things regionally, internationally. When we go to COP, we're like, yes, we support strong, blah, blah, blah. At home, we are effectively dismantling every tool, every policy that could help us get there. The due diligence was one of the best examples. In the Clean Industrial Deal, which is the new Green Deal, basically the new framework for which the Commission is supposed to present some concrete policies in January, there is a mention of increase of LNG imports. And also, we just approved a deal with Trump to ensure that we wouldn't increase tariffs. And there's a part of this deal that includes importing American energy worth $750 billion in the next 3 years. 750 billion is gigantic. It's never heard of. Like we're not even able to pay that. So it's unlikely to happen. But even if we import only 1/3 of that, it would basically make us dependent on American LNG for decades. So let's just put it that way, there's a massive gap between what we're hearing, which is the right direction, all the right words, and the policies that are being adopted, or actually not adopted, dismantled.
Thank you. Adrien, do you want to add something from an
Yes.
economic perspective?
Yeah, I think I mean, the key problem is that the EU Parliament is nominated by the right these days. I'm not sure that the strategy of adopting the right's point of view, meaning that our goal is to be ever more powerful, ever more rich, ever more competitive, is the right thing to do. I think that the key missing point to climate action and justice is north-south balance of power and solidarity. And this resonates with most people. And the left is silent on this. And I think it's not, I think it's like survey evidence, academic evidence show that the left would gain vote intention, or any party who would support that, but realistically it would be the left, if they included global solidarity policies in their platform. Exactly the types of policies that the Global South are demanding in negotiations. So there are two such kinds of policies that are gaining tractions at the moment. There is a levy on business flight tickets. Coalition of the willing is forming with Brazil, France, Spain, some African countries. They will implement a tax on private jets and business class and first class plane tickets. And the proceeds or part of the revenue from this tax will finance climate action in the Global South. There is another thing that is gaining traction is the Bridgetown Initiative, launched by the Prime Minister of Barbados, supported by the UN Secretary General, that would not cost a penny to anyone because, or only indirectly, but probably not, because it's just using some scriptures operations on the balance sheets of the IMF, some central banks, and multilateral development banks to provide funds with low interest rates to countries that needed to build green infrastructures. And countries in the Global South currently face very high interest rates and are not able to increase their level of debt. So I don't understand why we don't move on this Bridgetown initiative, given that it would be a win-win solution. So that's the kind of solutions that I would push to liberal policymakers. But for left-wing policymakers, I would push for coordination of their platforms around the world, and for much more ambitious proposals such as international wealth tax, not only on billionaires but on millionaires, that would finance public services and climate action all around the world.
Great, thank you very much. Stefano, maybe?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for organizing this very, very interesting talk. I have just a couple of questions. I'm writing in a small magazine here in Turin, and there are a lot of people, a lot of colleagues writing that basically the EU is completely turning back on the green policies, and I think that a narrative that can hide some truth, but at the same time, if we see worldwide what is happening with the green policies, I believe that we still need to clarify that Europe is keeping some aim and some ambition on the green objectives, even if it may be slowing down, and of course is deregulating something that it shouldn't. But so my question is, do you think that worldwide the world is looking at the EU as someone who had great ambition on climate, and now we are losing it, and so we are not anymore a leader on this topic, and who is the leader now? Is it China? Is it some other kind of regions? And for sure, if that is true, and I think it can be, which are the main reasons for this big change in these years and in this historical period? Because for sure we can complain that politicians are not ambitious enough, that they are betraying some ideas and some just ambitions, but at the same time, I think that the people in Europe is changing a bit his mind on these topics. And of course, the far right is leveraging on this, of course, but there is a shift in the people voting, and we see that at the election. So how can we tackle that kind of shift? And my last question, and I think it's all connected, is do you believe that the solution pass through the regulation more than investments? Because I believe that one of the big weaknesses of Europe is that Europe regulates a lot but invests far less, because we don't have a budget, we don't have a fiscal union, and we don't have a political union. So how much is costing us in terms of lack of investment and lack of political vision, the political division, not only between left and right, but mainly the lack of political unity within the EU? Thank you.
I can jump on it if you want. I'll try to synthesize, because that was 3 questions in one. I will start by the last one. Yes, there's a huge investment gap. Everybody's aware of it. But it is also because Europe on these topics refuses to jointly borrow money. That is the main problem. If you look at the Draghi report, disagree with many things that he says, but one of the things he says is that Europe is never going to be able to catch up if we fail to do joint borrowing, basically to invest. So that is a huge issue. Second point, apologies, they might be barking. Apologies, I just need to open the door. Give me a second. Adrien, I don't know if you want to jump in. Meanwhile, okay, give me a second.
I mean, okay, no, I have okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Chloe was better than me to answer to that. So yeah, I'm happy that you're back.
On the other point, sorry, I tried to take notes. People change. Yes, yes, Europe is changing for many reasons, but I would challenge your assumption also that the far right is supporting these changes and not instigating it. I think there's now many proof points that what we're seeing is heavily influenced by foreign influence, notably. If you look at the narrative around climate, for instance, massive amount of disinformation and fake news is growing. Of course, let's not deny responsibility, right? Like for years, we actually adopted environmental regulations that didn't have a social component, which means that now people are extremely angry because there's no money to support these changes. Yes, absolutely. But the conversation around climate is heavily influenced by disinformation, by misinformation, notably through foreign influence, namely the US and Russia. And this is documented. And then the final point on how does the rest of the world see Europe? I can share my experience at the Plastics Treaty. There is an increasing lack of trust in Europe's coherence, right? Because of this gap between what Europe says and what Europe does. So there's sort of a looking at Europe like, sure, they're going to say all the right things, but then they're probably not going to deliver. And in terms of who were the key players that other countries were looking at, China, for sure, the US still, but also countries such as India, Brazil, South Africa. Very much looking upon at by the rest of the world.
Adrian, do you want to add something to answer Stefano's question? in terms of investment, maybe, or
Yeah.
what do you call it?
No, I think it's better to take Daphne's question. I don't have any interesting thing to say.
Okay. Daphne, please remember to introduce yourself as well. So that
Okay.
we can...
So I'm Daphne Gogu. I'm president of the UF Greece, but I was the initiator of the due diligence directive professionally. So all the studies done by FRA, starting with FRA opinion, it was my idea. So yes, this is the reason I don't like to express how disappointed I am after the vote. So I will be very short because there are a lot of legal issues to discuss. I totally agree with you, Chloe. So I don't like to repeat what you said. But first, the vote. The political evaluation of this decision. This is really very important for the next period, and this has to be assessed really in details and see we will start now preparing the Congress, but this is really a key issue, how to evaluate this vote. This is the first thing, because this is really a very important vote. So it's not because we like a Green Deal or we have an emotional link with this proposal, not at all. But this is really very important political decision. And this has to be really assessed covering the different dimension of this vote. This is the first thing. The second thing is also because we discuss about treaty change. I'm a lawyer, so I don't like to go on legal details, but since the beginning, when we start discussing how at the EU we go ahead with UN guiding principles, well, it was two commission before. So we realized that there are legal gaps in order to be effective in the way we proceed, because this cannot be a company law instrument. It was very clear from the beginning. And all the previous due diligence texts, let's say legal texts at the EU level, they were regulation. So there are a lot of legal issues. So once we discuss about treaty change and why we need to go ahead with treaty change, there is a need now to assess deeper what we have to do in the area of justice. And this is not really one things for lawyer. It's really important because this is the victims' protection. It's also the effective remedy, the notion of effective remedy. It's a key issue of this proposal. So because there are a lot of legal issues we discuss years between us, we have different approach, but we have really to assess deeper the political impact of the decision for the next period of this commission or this parliament. Plus, we have really to start reflecting what we need now in the area of criminal justice, on liability, on civil liability, on different notion of protection of victims, and also to see also the approach follow for this directive, if it was the right one in order to deliver results or not. But I think it's really time now to start to be more effective and to prepare really with argument the next step. And the fact that we have this really bad moment, because this is not a step back, it's several step backs. Sorry to say that. It's 10-year hard work. I don't know how many impact assessment we have produced, how many studies before going to during the COVID period, the formulation of the proposal, how many discussions. So, and it's really, when Chloe mentioned, this is a really bad message of our credibility at the UN level. Well, obvious. I fully, at 300% agree with you, Chloe, because during years, we went each year during October session at the UN level in Geneva, and we say we promote our standard, blah, 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 and then nothing. Sorry, it's really a very bad moment, and we think, I think we have to go deeper and assess all the different dimensions of this this vote, and in order to prepare in more let's say strong and solid basis Europe of justice, including also criminal justice aspect, where it's really underdeveloped at the European level now.
Yeah, thank you, Daphne, for sharing that. Yeah, Chloe.
Let me just add one really quick thing on the legal aspect. On Monday last week, about 100 lawyers, I think it was 100 lawyers, actually challenged the legality of Omnibus 1. And just like you said, Daphne, about the fact that this whole process was sped up, lacked assessment, lacked public consultation, and basically, let's see what comes out of it. But I know that there's several NGOs here in Brussels and lawyers from across Europe that are saying big legal problem with that. Big democratic problem, of course. And then in terms of coherence, let's just not forget that for people, they also perceive this as like years and years and years, as you mentioned, of basically public money that is thrown down the drain in a matter of months. And I think for a lot of people, the frustration is pretty important on that front.
Adrien, do you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to now think ahead of the next battles to fight, which will be the the far right will try to dismantle the car emissions, the standards CO2 emissions on cars, and this is probably the most important piece of legislation of the Green Deal. And the ETS2 has already been delayed by 1 year. So this ETS2, together with the standards on CO2 emissions from new cars, are the cornerstone of the decarbonization package of the EU. So we really need to fight for them. And I'm quite hopeful because we had such a massive youth mobilization in 2018 around that year that brought to the EU Parliament a wave of green MEPs. I think the youth climate movement was instrumental in making the climate a theme of the campaign. And in the last EU election, the climate was absent and the right wing won. So in the next election, it will be 1 year after the introduction of the ETS2. It will be a big fight between, on the one hand, the right that will fight for dismantling the Green Deal, and on the other hand, the left that will fight to keep it. And we should prepare for this battle and, for example, fight the disinformation around electric cars. Many people think that they are as polluting as combustion engine cars because of the meddling of special interests that Chloe talked about. So yeah, lots of grassroots advocacy work to be done in the next years.
Thank you very much. I think we're heading to the end of this panel discussion. If there's one word that you would say, Adrien and Chloe, on from where you are, from where you stand, both as an activist as well as advocacy organization, where would you wait the Federalists to be if you would expect them to be somewhere on those topics? Where would you expect them to be? Sorry, this was not previous question, so it's on the top of your mind now.
I think on my side, it would be to take a strong stance against the deregulation wave that's happening, at least at the EU level. Really, really call out the alliance that the Conservatives are making with the far right, because as Daphne mentioned, like this is beyond one policy. This is, I mean, if we look back at history, authoritarian regimes have always very rarely actually seized power by force. They were quite often enabled by those already on the inside, traditional parties that were supposed to act as gatekeepers. They're not acting as gatekeepers. They're basically inviting them in, and putting them at the driving wheel. So from a just democratic perspective, what's happening is really terrifying. So I don't think this is a time to be on the sideline and not say anything. I think it's really time to speak out, because we live in very, very scary times. And then the final thing is we need to build coalitions as wide as possible. We need to make sure that we focus on what unites us. And these can be basic stuff such as democracy, you know, we're at this stage, and really be willing to, build coalitions and work together, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to seize back power. Be open, I guess, to coalitions, to working with different people that don't share 100% of your ideas, and really speak up on what's happening.
Thank you very much. Adrien?
Yeah, at the European level, I think the main fight for federalists is not on the climate issue, it's on the majority rule, qualified majority rule for any issue, especially taxation issue. But where I think federalists should be speaking in terms of global issues such as the climate is that we need a world federation, or at least some world governance mechanism that is democratic, accountable, and perhaps open to only a coalition of the willing to begin with to address these issues.
All right. Thank you very much to you two for those very interesting inputs on very diverse topic as well. Like we covered a lot. It was also first time we spoke about environmental issues for a long time in UEF Europe. So of course we had many things to say. It gives us food for thought. The idea was to prepare a press release for the last day of the COP30 on what we can say. I'm not sure we managed to do something like that, but we'll see maybe. Still, it gives us many thought, and as well something which is important is how we maintain the debate, not pro against cons, but amongst people who do think that we should do something for climate, for the environmental, for social justice, to maintain the debate amongst us, to find new solution, a new way of persuading people. Exactly the same as what we do for Europe, not debating pro and against Europe, but what kind of Europe we want. It's also the best way of shaping a debate where we can win. If we fight against all those who are against, we always lose. And I say that 20 years after French voted no to the constitutional treaty as well. It's 10:00. Thank you very much. Sorry for the technical issues at the beginning, but thank you very much for all of you who have been here tonight. Thank you, Adrien. Thank you, Chloe. For some of you, we see you in Athens this weekend, and other I hope we see quite soon for the Congress or other mobilization together. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.